And joining me to talk about all of this, Hawaiian Brian, the podcasting lion, the king of the Arcadian Vanguard Podcast Network, Mr. Co-host to you, the proprietor of the French Toast Chateau, and the man who makes nails quiver and shake in his prison boots, the great Brian Last, everybody.
Aloha, Jim. A pleasure to be here once again. As a fan of wrestling history, I'm surprised you went with nails and not the Convict.
Well, I was going to follow that up with discussion, because as I mentioned nails, I said, you know what, just the sight of Plowboy Frazier before he was even Plowboy Frazier in that Convict outfit where, correct me if I'm wrong, but do the stripes on normal prison, well, they don't do striped prison outfits anymore, but when you saw them in the movies, did they go round and round or up and down? Up and down like a referee or round and round?
You know, I've never thought of this. I think it went up and down.
Because with Frazier, they went around and round. And think about, now, for some of the younger listeners, Plowboy Frazier was a Memphis wrestling mainstay, and he worked in a number of the Southern territories, and he was almost 7 feet tall and well over, they billed him at 425, and I believe it. A lot of it in his midsection. And he was notorious. He was even used on top on a number of occasions, because a guy that big, you know, especially as a heel, and when he was partners with Lawler do the talking and everything, he got over, but he was not, let's say, Eddie Guerrero in terms of smoothness and technique. And before he became Plowboy Frazier, he had broken in as like Ed Hoss Younger, and he had a few different names, but they took him at the only major territory outside the South he ever got to work was the Los Angeles territory in the late 60s for the LaBelles. And he was the Convict. And they dressed him up in a mask, striped mask, and that full striped bodysuit. And as I mentioned, Frazier wasn't very svelte to begin with. And with those stripes going around him, it was just, and that face mashed up, and it was kind of like a Destroyer style mask where it would mash your nose and your lips up and everything. Quite a sight. That was a money drawing gimmick there briefly until they saw it a time or two.
Well, there's two curious things about it to me. One is the fact that this is LA before it went downhill, and somehow Stan Frazier got booked there and never got booked anywhere. Like you said, he got booked there. They make him the Convict. They do what they can. The other thing is, he got booked in Japan. They made a big deal of him. I have the issue of Gone that he's on the cover of, managed by Pampero Firpo. Stan Frazier went to Japan. I mean, it is one of the weirdest stories.
Okay, well, my son, Brian Last, get ready to sit under the learning tree. And you got to learn how some of these things take place that looks like a screen door on a submarine or some other type of juxtaposition of things that would not normally go together. I guarantee, without even having been there, I guarantee you that whoever was booking Los Angeles at the time had an idea for a convict and went about looking for, I don't know that Frazier was ever in jail, at least more than overnight, let's say. Who knows what happened down in Pascagoula, Mississippi in the old days. But somebody either had an idea for a convict, and a giant convict, and went about looking for somebody to be that, or Blassie was around at the time, right?
I believe so, yeah.
Blassie was working also with those days. He was huge in Georgia. He may have seen Frazier at some point and said, you know, that guy's got to be a gimmick, and come up with a gimmick and made, you know, his word would be law at that point in time. Somebody either came up with an idea for a giant convict and went to look for the guy to play the part, or just saw Frazier standing there somewhere and said, that guy's got to be a fucking gimmick. And there you go. And it would have to have been somebody in with the Los Angeles office. And that's how he got booked in Japan, because of the difference in Japanese and American cultures, especially then. That was a huge, the giant freak, Antonio, the great Antonio, a giant freakish gaijin foreigner whether it be the great Antonio that pulls the buses or this fucking, I'm sure they'd seen by that point the movies from the American movies of the old chain gangs or whatever. So that kind of thing people thought was more common in America. In Los Angeles, it was a kitschy gimmick, and it's fucking Hollywood, right? But in Japan, they might have thought, oh, this is one of those convicts. You know, oh shit, we've seen those in the movies. So, and then it never went anywhere else. Ever.
There was no 10 years later, the convict returns.
Yeah, the convict didn't even, once he returned to the United States, the convict wasn't back. He was back to being Frazier at that point then. So it was a hard sell, I guess, for the rest of the territories. Anyway,